your organization is involved with border carbon adjustments. And I wonder if you could explain a little bit what that is and why there is some bipartisan interest in the concept.
Yes, well, thanks, Bob, Tori, Av. Great to be with you today, and happy to providing you with a little relief from the debt crisis discussion. Of course, I imagine we may veer into fiscal issues as we're talking about things like carbon pricing and
Sure.
and fees at the border. But Bob, to your question, so at the simplest level, or the simplest level I can make it, what we're talking about when we use a term like a border carbon adjustment is a fee assessed on goods coming into the country based on the amount of carbon pollution, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions it took to manufacture that product. This is a global issue, climate change. A ton of carbon that's emitted in New Hampshire is equivalent in terms of its climate impacts as a ton that's emitted in China. And if we're going to address this problem, this challenge of climate change at the required scale and speed, we need to figure out a way not only to lower our domestic emissions, the emissions that take place in the United States, we're about 10% of global emissions. We got to figure out a way to have the rest of the world come along as well. And the advantage of a fee at the border is that we are leveraging the very powerful force that is the US consumer, our consumption culture, and sending a price signal, a market signal to all those manufacturers who export goods to the United States to reduce their emissions. The other advantage of this type of a policy is it rewards those actors in the global economy that are operating the cleanest, that are leading in reducing their emissions. And it just so happens that among the most efficient, cleanest companies in the world are those that operate here in the United States. So we've done analysis which shows that US manufacturers, on average, are about 44% more carbon efficient than the global average, meaning we can make the same goods while emitting about 44% less emissions. And so if we get the incentives right, we get those market incentives right, we're going to reward US manufacturers, boost the US economy, and encourage everyone else in the world to compete to lower their emissions.
What could you give us some examples of what imported goods would be subject to the adjustment?
So the most obvious are the really heavy manufactured goods like steel and aluminum and chemicals. Those are heavily traded. They are very energy intensive and they're very carbon intensive. It takes a lot of energy to make a ton of steel and it requires a lot of carbon emissions. And so if we were to include those goods, we would capture a good percentage of global emissions. And we'd also send a fairly powerful market reward to manufacturers that are already leading the way. So using steel as an example, we're anywhere from 50% to 300% more efficient than many of the competitors for whom we compete with domestically who are exporting steel to the United States. And if we got these incentives right, we would see US capacity, US steel capacity max out. So that means every steel mill in the country is operating at max capacity. And what's displaced are the most carbon intensive, highest polluting parts of the market that are importing into the United States.